Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 3 Fire, Episode 6, The Avatar and The Firelord. This one's animated by JM Animation. Makes sense, it's one of the most important episodes of the series. Of course it was animated by the main studio, and this is an episode I really like. I suppose if you're comparing this to Korra, this is I suppose the beginnings of Korra in a way, of Avatar in a way. That kind of key backstory episode, and it's so well done. And I think for me, it's one of those things where whenever I watch this episode, it always surprises me that, like, oh yeah, up until this moment, we actually never knew why the war started. Like, it's this huge thing of, like, stop the war, the comet. We knew bits and pieces of what Sozin did, but never really knew why it started in the first place. What led to it happening, what was Roku up to, like, when he died and kind of unfortunately kind of left a lot of this stuff for Aang to deal with. How did that all, like, come about? And so just kind of seeing this episode and getting that story and how they really cleverly use it to give, like, Aang and Zuko important context going into, like, the final stage of the series is so well done, because obviously with Zuko they kind of bring up, like, words like balance with Zuko, whereas previously you'd refer that primarily to the Avatar, so Aang. And then it links in really well with the fact that Aang at the start of this season was using stuff like, saying stuff like getting his honor back, so the kind of duality of, like, Aang and Zuko throughout. The only thing for me with this episode was that this is the first time I watched this episode since Turf Wars Part 1 came out. And obviously that book revealed one big thing about Sozin, and that was that he, as far as the book is presenting it, he's like the only homophobic character in the entire Avatar universe, basically. And obviously if you've seen my reviews, you'll know that that is a writing decision that I just did not understand. I don't, still to this day, do not get why they made that decision. It felt like a really kind of poorly done, lazy writing decision to just add this other thing onto a character just because he's a villain. And I suppose it spoke to the fact that they kind of wrote themselves into a corner where, like, they don't want to make any character homophobic, but the only character they felt that they could was Sozin. And so because of that, I felt like, yeah, it was just badly done in that I don't think it really fits with Sozin, outside of the fact that, oh, he's a villain. Why does it matter if we add on this other thing to him? Whereas, like, no, he's a character. He's not just this, villain who we can just say he's done everything wrong and he's completely bad in every way. This episode does an amazing job at actually presenting so many different sides of Sozin, showing you that basically this is a very similar dynamic to Aang and Zuko. That, obviously Aang and Zuko's is like, if they come together as friends and work together, they could right the wrongs of what happened before. And this is kind of showing you, what if that same dynamic fell apart dramatically and how it could cause a war. And just the idea of, like, this important friendship and the two of them, like, seeing them as, like, teenagers, seeing Roku announced as, the Avatar, seeing their weddings and, their kind of the moments as you follow them through their lives. It really doesn't fit that you have this kind of fog of the fact that at some stage in his life, like, Sozin made all these decisions that made it really tough for, gay people in the Fire Nation. It's just like, when did this happen? Did Roku not care about it? Or did this happen after Roku's death? Which even then, it kind of doesn't really fit, in that they completely characterize Sozin post the death of Roku as this guy utterly obsessed with hunting down the Avatar. He basically says it himself. He wasted the rest of his life focusing on trying to find the Avatar, whether that be attacking the air nomads and using the comet, or then kind of switching focus to the water tribes. That, where did he find the time to suddenly try and make this weird change within the Fire Nation, where they went from being fairly okay with these type of relationships to actually, like, him seemingly putting it into law almost that you're meant to oppose these type of things. it's it's a weird thing that Turf Wars has done to this episode for me, and I don't know if like it's going to be one of those things where like a lot of people will feel the same way. I'd love to see you guys, if you have rewatched this episode since Turf Wars, how you feel about the character of Sozin, given the reveal that they had in Turf Wars about him. Do you feel that it's kind of changed aspects of this about this episode? Because I don't know about you guys, but like for me, it's always been a thing with Sozin where he's meant to be a villain you can understand. I think for the most part, that has been almost every villain in Avatar, that you can understand to a degree why they're doing what they're doing, even if you can see flaws in what they were going through. So Sozin, in his case, is the leader of a very successful nation, which is going through this period of, as he says, wealth and prosperity, and he sees, the way to kind of keep things going is to expand into the other nations and spread that prosperity. Obviously presenting it in a very kind of positive light, but to other people it obviously coming across as the start of someone beginning to conquer the world, which is obviously what Roku talks about, and how the four nations need to remain four colonies, and starting to link them things together, not the best idea. But at the same time, by Aang's time, we get into a period where actually, it's all about the nations actually starting to come together. Obviously, I think the idea being that Sozin was more taking over, the places he took over, rather than it really being this kind of like linking of cultures. Though the promise does present Yu Dao as more or less being that way, even though yes, the Earth Kingdom people were kind of the lower class to the Fire Nation people, it still ultimately created this strong alliance in some of the colonies. The problem was what happened after that. Clearly, I think clearly presenting this idea of like Roku's kind of opposition to Sozin in a way almost made Sozin go down a darker path with everything he was doing. That the implication is almost that like, and I think the promise makes this a little bit clear as well, that Roku, it was almost a negative of him as the Avatar, that he was so set in stone that the four nations must remain four, that he was so don't join the nations at all, that it became a problem for him, obviously by Aang's time, of like him trying to advise Aang about the way things are going, whereas in Aang's time it was about the nations coming together. Now I think it is a little bit of a stretch to try and present Sozin as this kind of like a forerunner for kind of progress and the different kind of cultures coming together, but given what we know of the early colonies that persists up to this day, they are the origin point of what becomes Republic cities. So, maybe it is a kind of, a good idea from Sozin, taken too far, warped to become obviously what it was, whereas instead of it just being some like sharing of ideas and kind of knowledge wealth, it turned into this complete take over the world type plot. And in a way, obviously, as we sort of get that, the reason a lot of this happens is primarily because Sozin just wants to hunt down the Avatar, who he sees as always being the one to in any way stop him. So adding on to the fact that Sozin's a villain, I don't even think he's like the most villainous character out there, because even though yes, he's performed all these awful things, I never felt like it was out of like complete spite for like the people that like he ended up like killing. Like the Air genocide, obviously like one of the most tragic events in the entire Avatar universe, but it didn't come from a place of like Sozin hating the Air Nomads. It just, because he wanted the Avatar kind of gone, he just wiped out that whole group of people just because the Avatar was being born into them next. And it's just a matter of the cycle and the way it was. So that's why I find it a little bit of a stretch to kind of suddenly say like he's kind of like homophobic and suddenly try and add in this like extra personal evil intent to him, when like you had a fascinating character prior to that reveal. You didn't need to add that onto him, because there was already the conflict of like, you can see some of what he was wanting to do, but then you can see how kind of brainwashed almost. He had made himself about this idea, whereas the second Roku opposed him, he almost doubled down on it and like kept it secret from Roku, and like, oh, he's opposing my great idea. Does he not? Is he not my friend anymore? Type of thing. But still, like this is a great episode. As much as I've kind of talked for a good bit about this, Turf Wars reveal, it doesn't ruin the episode. It's just an extra thing now added to this episode, bringing the whole continuity stuff together, that I think adds unnecessary, like I said earlier, like adds a kind of unnecessary kind of fog over aspects of this episode that just makes it feel weird watching it now. But still, there's some great stuff here. Just seeing like some of the lighter moments of like Tommen and Roku coming together, their wedding. Roku giving Aang a little piece of advice. Even just in the more present day side of the episode, seeing that Aang is kind of getting this story through a very spiritual event, whereas Zuko is getting the story by visiting the catacombs and like the old history, basically finding out about it. And then at the end, obviously, he gets the lesson he was actually meant to hear, which was about his other great-grandfather. And that being such an amazing reveal when it happens, of just like, you have more than one great-grandfather, and like, that one on that side, the one on the other side was Avatar Roku, and suddenly it's like, no. Like, Zuko's related to a previous Avatar, and it's Roku. Amazing connection. And then what they do with it in terms of explaining that, like, this dual lineage that you have, coming from, like, the great good in the world and, like, the great evil in the world, in a way represents the struggle that you're dealing with. You never know to side with good or bad, because you are always at conflict because of who you are. And and then I were kind of presenting the really interesting dynamic of like, as much as that like strife is born within you, it also means that you have the power to kind of ultimately redeem everything, solve this. You can return balance to the world, and especially with what Aang, I suppose, takes away from this, the idea that in the past, what started the war was Roku and Sozin's friendship breaking apart. Aang and Zuko coming together as friends could be the thing to guide the world towards an era of peace and end the war. And that is just such a great dynamic to present here. Just having a reveal like that about Zuko's kind of lineage is so amazing, and especially with obviously how the search goes about explaining the idea in terms of like, wait, if they hated each other for so long, how on earth did this happen? But then you kind of realize that, okay, to make the blood in terms of the Fire Nation royal family side of things, to make their bloodline as powerful as possible, why wouldn't they want to kind of eventually get to a point where they had, children who are royalty, who have, of course, are in the royal family, which is the lineage of Sozin, but then also have the added power of coming from a very powerful person like the Avatar. And those people, of course, are Zuko and Azula. So it's really, really interesting to kind of just see that dynamic, that this was planned in a way, that the goal from the higher-ups in the, the military, the royal family, basically planning to make their bloodline as strong as possible, ended up being the thing that ultimately took them down. Their quest for power, just regards to bloodline, ended up being the thing that, kind of almost tore it down, the idea of that. In a way, I suppose you could also look at it from the perspective of like, Zuko's powerful, and he's actually, a good person. Is that more powerful than what the intent was in the first place, and so on? So there's obviously a lot of different ways of looking at it. The other thing, I suppose, would be the big decision that Roku makes, which he obviously sees as his eventually like the biggest regret in his life, which is not taking out Sozin and at that last opportunity, the moment where he spared him and left him in the name of their friendship. Was it a mistake or not? It's obviously one of those ones in hindsight. Perhaps, yes, it was. If Roku had taken him out, a lot of stuff wouldn't have happened. But at the same time, I've always been of the perspective of like, what Roku knew about Sozin at that point in time I don't think he would have been incredibly justified in killing him, at least in terms of what we as the audience know in that situation. They obviously explained to us colonies, but we don't know the extent of what was happening there. If it was just they kind of were, in the name of the Fire Nation, we kind of roughly take over this place, but there's no cruelty going on, then like, okay, I can see why Roku wouldn't be like so serious as to just immediately kill him. But if there was kind of like torture or slavery going on early on, then maybe it's a bit more like, yeah, so Roku, you should have done something more here. But as it's presented to us, like all Roku knows that Sozin has done is take over the initial colonies, which he's known about for a long time, and so on. The initial colonies, and they obviously have their kind of fight about this, and he basically says, if you do any more or continue on with this, I will take you out. And clearly, Sozin doesn't really do much more in the kind of 25 years, 20 years in between this. It makes it, it's kind of complicates things in a way where, like, I very much am of the opinion of, like, it would have been, I think, very, very harsh and a little bit difficult to, I suppose, really say, like, it was the just act of Roku to kill Sozin at that point in time for what he had done. Because this is his friend who he's known since childhood, and while he's obviously noted some changes in him about him being, I suppose, more power hungry, wanting to spread the wealth of the Fire Nation, fundamentally, he's not done anything like evil. Nothing up until that point would suggest to Roku that this is a guy who's going to go on and kill basically all of the air nomads, try to destroy both water tribes, and basically start this war that's going to go on and ruin the world for 100 years. Nothing up until that point suggests that it would go that far, in that Roku basically doing what he did in terms of like giving him this final threat stopped a lot of that, is the implication that I have, and that the episode doesn't really seem to suggest that like Sozin just immediately went to work and started bigging up the colonies all over again, because the idea is that by the time we get to the Earth Kingdom in Avatar: The Last Airbender, there are a few more colonies than were initially there, but that's because of the war going on. I'm very much of the perspective of like the Yu Dao and the initial colonies were the ones that have been there since the start, and they were only added on to basically post Roku's death. So Roku's threat did actually stop things for a while, and it was, again, like the other situation is, of course, that Sozin actually went to the island to help Roku. That I really don't think he went there with the intent of like, oh, I'm going to kill him when I get there. I think he honestly knew that this was a terrible thing that was happening to his friend's island and went to help him. And it just so happened that the perfect opportunity arose. He knows Roku's much more powerful than him. And then he sees a weakened Roku, struggling with the fumes right there in front of him. His one opportunity, basically. If he saves him, his plans will never happen. If he just leaves, he'll die and he can go along with it, because that's the betrayal. Like, I think it's very interesting that Sozin doesn't just kill Roku, that he just leaves him there to die after coming to save him. It's a betrayal, but it's like this one where like he doesn't commit the act himself as such, in that I think the big thing to think about here is that it was just a random, like, jet of toxic gas that hit Roku. That could have very easily have been Sozin that got hit with that. So he put himself in unnecessary risk to come here, and I think that speaks to the fact that he was honestly there to help, and it was just he saw that opportunity when Roku got hit and took it. So I think they do such a great job at, I suppose, showing the conflict of these two friends, in that as much as they, especially come the middle point of their lives and afterwards, the friendship in terms of how close they were is kind of gone. they always showed this connection that the two of them had together. And that moment at the end of like it just being this kind of chance opportunity, I thought was the perfect way to kind of do that in the end. And another reason for why like I'm always like Sozin, yes, is evil, but I think we've had other more villainous characters, and that I think Ozai ultimately is a more like evil character than Sozin, in terms of how he acts and stuff like that. In that, I think Ozai kind of makes a little bit more sense almost to be the character who should be like the kind of homophobic one, more so than Sozin, in a way. Maybe even have that be a Zulon like that. But Sozin, I definitely just got the impression of just like, you know, warped over time by power, but not this just truly kind of evil character who just hated specific types of people. I never really got that impression from him. But yeah, just amazing stuff at the end, that emotional scene. The fact that Fang comes in and kind of spends his life, basically sacrifices himself to spend his last moments trying to, I suppose, protect his master, and they both kind of die together. We see the birth of Aang, and it just showing the cycle so clearly. Just amazing episode. And then, as I said earlier on, the end conclusion of like the episode being that like Aang interprets this as like it's showing that anyone is capable of great good and great evil. Everyone is worth giving a chance. That this was about friendship, and it kind of very much opens Aang's mind to being friends with people. And they set this up back in book 1. Aang said to Zuko, you know, what would things be like if we were friends, kind of type thing. And I love that that setup has been there, and this episode immediately brings the connection of Aang and Zuko back into play. And then on Zuko's side, this is such a huge thing for his character to now know that he's related to an avatar, and kind of have explained to him, maybe not exactly why he struggles so much, but like some sort of a reason in terms of like destiny, spirit type stuff, why it is such a challenge for him. Just really well done. And I love that this is the moment where Iroh finally speaks to Zuko, that he just comes out and says that to him. And the fact is, like, Iroh knew this all along. Like, this isn't something Iroh has just figured out. Iroh, the entire series basically, has known this relationship about Zuko, and has chosen this to be the opportunity to tell him. But I think even more so than that, it's the fact that he's been so heavily advising Zuko this entire time because he knew the potential that Zuko had to be this person that could make a huge change within things going forward. And then the fact that Iroh has the artifact of the crown prince is so interesting, because in the animation they do show when Roku gets up, when the volcano starts on his island, he knocks over the artifact and clearly never picks it up, so it's just kind of covered in ash basically because of what happened, clearly suggesting that at some stage Iroh went to this island and found it, which I think suggests that at some point earlier on in his life he discovered this connection of like his family to Roku's family, and kind of tracked it back and found this artifact and knew it would be kind of important as like a symbol basically going forward. And I think it just adds this extra layer to like that Iroh backstory. There's so many connections to be made with that, while also being really good character stuff and so on. I'm really, everything just keeps building towards the fact that that has to be something that they at some point tell us about. So yeah, just can't praise this episode enough. But I think the new thing with this episode, of course, is how you interpret this episode now with that extra piece of knowledge from Turf Wars in mind. I, of course, made it pretty clear here that I'm not a fan of that Turf Wars reveal and what it does to the character and how it affects this episode. I don't think it ruins the episode, but it's not a great thing. I think there's a way to develop Sozin more. I think there's so many different ways, so many more unique and amazing ways you could use to develop Sozin more. This isn't one of them, but it's not really too big of a factor with this episode. That's more on Turf Wars, for sure. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are and everything I had to say here about this episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.